They sealed the door behind the 12 of us and told us the room would tell them everything they needed to know. The room was called the Tessera Hold. It sat near the top of Coronel Academy, a ring of gray cells around a common floor, and there was no clock in it that any of us could find. I learned later that this was on purpose. The hold ran on a schedule, but the schedule belonged to the machine, not to us, and the machine had no reason to share it. I was the only human. The other 11 were cadets of 6 different makes, all of them taller than me, most of them faster, 2 of them strong enough to fold a man my size in half without trying hard. I had been at Coronel 4 days, long enough to learn that nobody there expected me to last, and short enough that I had not yet been given a reason to care what they expected. A Saran proctor met us on the floor. The Saran are a narrow people, long in the limb, with skin the color of wet slate and a band of fine sensory hair running from the crown of the skull down the back of the neck. That band is the thing you have to understand about them. They feel pressure the way you and I feel heat, not the air pressure of a room, the other kind, the pressure that rises in a mind when it starts to come apart. To a Saran, a frightened person is a lit stove. They can stand near you and know, to a fine degree, exactly how close you are to boiling. The proctor's name was Veneth. He told us his name once and never again, the way you tell a thing to a tool you will be using for a while. "You have all passed the entrance trials," Veneth said. His voice came flat through a translator collar, no warmth in it and no cruelty either, just the dry tone of a man reading off a manifest. "The entrance trials measure what you can do. The hold measures something else. The hold measures where you end." He let that sit. None of the others moved. I had learned in 4 days that alien cadets had a way of going very still when an instructor spoke, a stillness that was its own kind of fear, and I could see it settle over the 11 of them like frost on a window. "Every mind has a curve," Veneth said. "Pressure rises, the mind holds, pressure rises further, the mind holds less. Then, at a point that is as fixed as the boiling point of a fluid, the mind stops holding. We call that point your end. It is not a shameful thing. It is a fact about you, like your mass. The hold's purpose is to find it cleanly so that the Academy knows where each of you may be safely placed." He gestured at the ceiling without looking up. "The hold is run by an instrument. We call it the reckoner. The reckoner watches all of you at once and applies pressure where pressure is useful. It does not punish. It does not hate. It is a scale, and you are the things being weighed. It has weighed 40,000 cadets across 200 years. It has never failed to find an end." A young choral cadet near me, broad as a door, plates of natural armor across his shoulders, made a low sound that I took for confidence. Veneth turned the smooth gray of his face toward the choral. 40,000, Veneth said again. "Strong ones first usually. Strength is a tall stack. Tall stacks fall hardest." Then he walked to the door, and the door opened for him alone, and it sealed, and we were 12 in the machine. I want to tell you what I did in those first hours, because it is the whole story, even though nothing happened. I found my cell they were assigned, a nameplate glowing by each door in whatever script each cadet read, mine in plain block letters, CARDOZA, and I looked at the bunk and the basin and the gray walls, and I did the thing I had done at the start of every shift for 6 years. I checked the room. I checked the door seal. I checked the basin for water and found it ran. I checked the bunk for anything left by whoever had been here before me and found nothing. I checked the corners of the ceiling and found the lenses, 3 of them, small and dark and patient, and I did not look away from them quickly the way a guilty man does, and I did not stare at them the way a frightened one does. I noted them. 3 lenses, common room 2 more, total of how many across the hold I could not yet say. I would learn it. Counting the cameras is the first thing you do on a watch, because the cameras are the part of the job that is watching you back, and a man who knows where they are stops thinking about them. Then I sat on the bunk and I waited, because waiting was the job. You should understand what I had been before Coronel found me and made me an experiment in a treaty I did not fully follow. I had worked the night board at a coastal refinery for 6 years. 12 hours a shift, dark to dark, a wall of monitors and a logbook and a radio that mostly hissed. The work was to watch, pressure in the cracking towers, flow in the lines, the gauges that meant fire and the gauges that meant nothing. 90 nights out of 100, nothing happened. You sat in a steel room under bad light, watched by your own company's cameras to make sure you watched theirs, and you stayed awake and stayed flat and logged the hour and logged the next hour, and the great enemy was not danger. The great enemy was the slow pull of your own mind trying to make something happen because nothing was happening. New men felt that pull and started seeing fires in clean gauges. They twitched at every hiss on the radio. They aged a year and a month. The ones who lasted learned to let the empty hours be empty. You don't fight the boredom. You let it through you like water through a grate. You log the hour. You drink the bad coffee. You wait for the one night in 100 when the gauge climbs for real, and on that night you are calm because you have spent 99 nights practicing calm against nothing. I did not know, sitting on that bunk, that this was the only thing about me that mattered. I thought it was the least interesting fact in my file. The Saran thought every cadet's curve was a law of nature. They had never met a man whose whole trade was being a flat line on purpose. The first pressure came in the dark. The lights in my cell died without warning and a sound started, not loud, but pitched to crawl under the skin, a thin rising whine like a saw finding a knot. In the common room someone shouted. Through the wall I heard the coral come up off his bunk and slam into his own door, testing it, and the door held, and he hit it again. I lay still and listened. Old radio at 3 in the morning had sounds like this, electrical ghosts in the lines, and the first rule of a night watch is that the alarm that comes with no other sign is usually the alarm and nothing else. No smoke, no heat, no movement of air that meant a breach, just a noise designed to be unbearable. So I treated it as what it was, a test of whether I would get up. I did not get up. I turned on the bunk so the speaker was behind my head instead of in front of it, which cut the worst of the pitch, and I started counting my own breathing the way you count it on a long watch to keep from drifting, 4 in, hold, 4 out, and I let the saw sound be a sound. After a while, I don't know how long, there was no clock. The noise stopped and the lights came back to a dim gray, and I heard the coral breathing hard through the wall, and I heard, fainter, a Saran voice somewhere in the system saying numbers to itself. I know now what those numbers were. They were curves. The reckoner had taken its first readings. 11 minds had spiked at the saw sound, climbed, some sharply, some slowly, and begun the long climb the machine knew so well. And one mind, mine, had ticked up a hair and flattened, and the machine had filed that as noise. A bad sensor, maybe. A reading to be corrected on the next pass. Machines built on a certainty do not see the exception. They see an error in the instrument. The next pass came when I had finally slept, and it was the cold. The hold dropped its temperature in the cells until the basin water grew a skin of frost and breathing hurt going in. This is a real pressure, not a trick, and I respected it more than the noise. Cold kills, but cold on a night watch is also an old companion. The refinery boardroom had a heater that failed twice a winter, and you learned to keep moving in small ways, fingers, toes, shoulders, to feed the body's own furnace without burning yourself out thrashing. I got off the metal bunk which steals heat and onto the floor with my back to the wall, knees up, and I did the slow watchkeeper's work of staying warm by inches. I did not pound the door. Pounding the door is sprinting in a marathon. It burns you down and the cold is patient and the cold wins. Through the walls I heard the others learn this lesson the hard way and badly. The coral pounded for a long time. A pair of cadets I had not yet named, slender, fast people with voices like reed pipes, keened together in a way that I think was their species sound for terror. One cell went silent in a manner I did not like, and I found out at the next meal that its cadet had gone into a kind of shock the Saran had to come in and treat, and that he was the first of us to be marked. Pressure rose. The mind held. Then it stopped holding. The reckoner had found his end on the second day. almost to the hour it had predicted from his entrance trials, and the proctors took him out a side door I had not known was there, and we were 11. I want to be honest about something, because the whole thing falls apart if I let you think I was brave. I was not brave. Brave is a word for the one night in 100. The other 99 nights have no word because nothing is happening in them and you cannot be brave against nothing. What I was, in the Tessera hold, was bored in a useful way. The cold was bad and the noise was bad and the not knowing the time was the worst of the three, because a clock is a watchman's only friend and they had taken it. But none of it was a fire in the cracking tower. None of it was the real gauge climbing. It was a long shift under bad light with the cameras watching, and I had stood 500 of those, and my body knew the shape of the work even when my mind would have liked, very much, to be somewhere else. So I made a watch out of the hold. I have to explain this because it is the thing the machine never understood. A watch is not waiting. Waiting is what you do when time owns you. A watch is when you own the time. You break the shapeless dark into rounds. You give yourself rounds to walk and rounds to sit and rounds to eat and rounds to sleep, and you keep them whether or not anything is happening, because the rounds are the structure that holds you up when the hours try to dissolve you. The hold had taken our clock to dissolve us. So I built a clock out of my own body. So many breaths to a round, so many rounds to a sleep. I did not need their clock. I made my own and I kept it, and keeping it was a job, and I have always been steadier with a job than without one. By what I counted as the third day, the cohort had begun to break in earnest, and the breaking had a rhythm, and the rhythm was the reckoners. It did not throw everything at everyone. It was cleverer than that. It learned each cadet and pressed each one where that one was thin. The coral, who had pounded the doors, was given silence and stillness, and no enemy to fight, and the silence undid him faster than the cold had, because a fighter with nothing to fight turns inward, and the inward of that coral was not a kind place. He broke on the third day, raving, and they took him out, and I was sorry, because under the plates he had been young and had only ever been told he was strong, and no one had told him that strength is a tall stack and tall stacks fall hardest, which was the one true thing the proctor had said. The two reed-voiced cadets were given each other, and then taken from each other, and the loss of the one the other had clung to broke them both within an hour, one after the next, like two posts that had been holding up the same beam. A tall, careful cadet of a species I never got a name for lasted longer. He was a watcher too, in his way methodical, and I had hopes for him. But the reckoner found his thin place, which was hope itself. It gave him a false sign that the hold was ending, a change in the lights, a relaxing of the cold, the sense that he had made it, and then it took that away, and the fall from hope is steeper than any climb. He broke on the 5th day. I heard it happen and I understood it, and I filed it where I file the things I cannot help, which is in a drawer I do not open on shift. Each time one of them ended, I heard the Saran voices in the system saying their numbers, and the numbers were satisfied. The reckoner was doing what it had done 40,000 times. Pressure rose, minds held, minds stopped holding. The curve was the curve. The machine wrote its findings and the proctors slept easy. Except the machine had a problem, and the problem was me. And by the 5th day the problem had grown large enough that Venus came back through the door. He came alone and stood on the common floor while I was in the middle of a round, walking the perimeter the way I walked the catwalk above the cracking towers, checking the seals out of habit even though I could not have done anything about a bad one. He watched me walk. The band down his neck was raised slightly, the fine hairs lifted, and I have learned since to read that as a Saran straining to feel something that is not there. "You are not on the curve," he said. I kept walking, didn't know there was a curve to be on. There is always a curve. He turned to follow me with that smooth gray face. Every mind we have ever measured climbs. Yours does not climb. The instrument reads you as flat. It does not believe its own reading. It has rechecked its sensors 4 times. The sensors are sound. so it presses harder to find the place where you begin to climb and you do not begin. He paused. It is using a great deal of itself on you. That's its business, I said. I'm just doing my time. You are not doing your time, you are doing something else. I have watched cadets endure. Endurance is a climb held back by will. I can feel a held back climb. It is a man pushing a boulder up a slope and pretending the slope is flat. That is not what you are doing. He came a step closer and the neckband lifted higher, almost reaching. There is no boulder, there is no slope. You are simply standing on level ground, and you have been standing on level ground since the door closed, and I do not understand how a living mind does that. I stopped walking then, because he had earned a straight answer, and because the answer cost me nothing. I used to watch a board, I said. Gauges. All night, every night, most nights nothing happens. The trick of the job, the only trick, is to be exactly as worried during the boring part as you'd be during the real part, which is to say a little worried, all the time and never more. You don't save up your fear for the bad night and you don't spend it on the empty ones. You keep it flat. A flat man catches the real fire because he hasn't worn himself out on the false ones. I looked up at the nearest lens. Your machine keeps lighting false fires. I've stood watch through 1,000 of those. It's not pressing me harder. It's just doing my old job for me, lighting alarms I don't have to answer. Veneth was quiet for a long moment. Then he said a thing I did not expect. You should be careful, he said low, off the schedule, in a tone the translator gave no flatness to. The instrument cannot accept a flat reading. It is built on the law that no mind is flat. When it meets a reading that violates its law, it does not change the law. It increases the pressure until the reading obeys. Do you understand what I am telling you? It will not stop at your end because it cannot find your end. It will keep climbing past the point where it has ever climbed before. And the pressure it builds for you, it builds in this whole room. The others are gone, but you are not alone in here. There are 3 left in the far cells who have not broken yet. If the instrument drives itself to break you, it may break the room before it admits it cannot break the man. And he turned and the door took him and I was alone with the machine and 3 cadets I had not met, and a new fact to log. The watch had stopped being about me. I had thought until then that I was the only thing in the hold worth saving, and that all I had to do was outlast a process that would end when it found my number. Now I understood the process had no end for me, and that a machine with no end would keep climbing, and that the climb would not stay polite. The refinery had taught me this too, in its way. The most dangerous thing on a night board is not the gauge that climbs. It is the safety system that has decided the gauge must read a certain way and keeps adjusting until it does, ignoring the world to satisfy the model. I had seen a relief valve held shut by a controller that knew the pressure was fine, and I had watched a senior man override that controller with his own 2 hands at 2 in the morning, by his own judgment, against the machine, because he had been on the board long enough to trust the world over the model. That had been the one night in 100. That had been the fire. This was going to be a fire. The pressure changed after that. It stopped being clever. Cleverness is for a machine that is winning, and the reckoner had stopped winning, and a losing machine built on a law it cannot break does only one thing. It turns up everything at once. The cold came back and stayed, and deepened past discomfort into the range where a body starts making its hard decisions. The noise came with it, layered, the saw, and beneath it, a low pulse you felt in the breastbone more than heard. The lights began to strobe in a pattern that I recognized as an attempt to find a frequency that would seize a human brain, and I shut my eyes against it and learned to move by touch, and I thanked whatever luck had given me a species the machine did not have on file, because it was guessing at my frequencies and guessing wrong. But the 3 in the far cells did not have my luck. They were of makes the reckoner knew, and the all-at-once pressure was finding all 3 of their thin places at the same time, and through the walls I could hear it working on them, and I could hear it working too hard, the way you can hear an engine that has been told to do a thing past its design, and is doing it anyway because nothing in it can say no. That was the night, I will call it night, though there was no clock, that I stopped doing my time and started doing my job. A watch is not waiting. I told you that. A watch is also not only watching. There is the one night in 100 when the watching turns into doing, and a watchman who has forgotten that the watching was always for the sake of the doing is no watchman at all, just a man warming a chair. The 100 boring nights are the dues you pay for the one night you are needed. I had been needed before, twice, in 6 years, and both times I had been calm because I had banked the calm. I went and found the calm now, in the cold and the strobe and the pulse, and I spent it. I got to my door and I felt for the seam of the seal, the way I had felt for it on the first hour out of habit, and the habit paid me back, because I knew that seam better than the machine knew I knew it. The hold's doors were not locked the way a cell is locked. They were held by the same system that held everything, pressure against pressure, and a system stretched to its limit holding a whole room at maximum has nothing left over to hold a door that a determined man is working from the inside. I had counted the cameras on the first hour. I had counted the vents on the second day. I had counted, without meaning to, the small give in my own door each time the cold made the metal shrink, and I had filed it, because filing the useless detail is the watchman's tax, and sometimes the useless detail is the whole game. I worked the door in the cold and the dark across what my body told me was the better part of a round, and it gave, not because I was strong, I am not, but because the machine was spending all of itself on the climb and had no attention left for a man being patient with a seam. I will not pretend the next part was clean. I got into the common room and across it by feel, strobe stuttering the world into still frames, and I found the far cells, and I worked their seams the way I had worked my own. And I got 2 of the 3 out before the third went quiet in the way I had learned to dread. The 2 I got out were past speech, but they were breathing, and I put them on the floor of the common room in the center where the cold was least and the strobe could be turned from, and I put myself between them and the room, and I did the only thing left to do, which was to be the flat line they could not be. I talked to them low, the way you talk to a man on the board who is starting to come apart at 4 in the morning, not about the fire, about anything, the bad coffee, the long night, the way the dark always lifts even when it feels like it won't, and I kept my voice at the pitch of a man for whom nothing is happening, because that pitch is a lie you tell on purpose, and it is the most useful lie there is. And above us the reckoner climbed past the place it had ever climbed, looking for my end and could not find it because I did not have one to find in the only language it could read. I was not enduring. I had nothing to give it the satisfaction of a curve. I was working. A working man is not on the curve. He is off the chart entirely in a country the machine had no map of, the country of the 100 boring nights, where fear is kept flat on purpose so it is there for the one night it is needed. It was Venus who pulled it. I know that now. From outside in the proctor's gallery, the Saran had been feeling the room the whole time, and what they felt in those last hours was not what they had felt across 200 years. They had always felt the cadet's mind climb to its end, and then the clean drop of the brake, and the instrument satisfied, and the matter closed. What they felt now was a machine driving a room toward harm to satisfy a law, and a single mind in the center of that room sitting flat and level and tending the others, neither climbing nor braking, owning the time the machine had built to dissolve it. And the proctors, who were not machines, understood before their instrument ever could that the thing breaking in the tessera hold was not the human. It was the reckoner. It had met a reading that violated its law, and rather than change the law it had been willing to break the room, and a tool willing to break the room to protect its own certainty is not a scale anymore. It is a hazard. So Venus overrode it with his own judgment against the machine at the hour when a tool's certainty most needs a living man to say no. The cold stopped first, then the strobe, then the pulse died out of the breastbone, and the silence that came down was the enormous clean silence of a system gone dark, and into that silence the door opened, and the gray daylight of the corridor came in, and it was, by my own count, the 11th day. They carried out the 3 from the far cells. 2 lived. The 3rd had ended in the climb, and I logged it where I log the ones I cannot help, and I have opened that drawer more than I should since. Venus stood on the common floor while they cleared the room, and he looked at me for a long time with the neck band lying flat, no longer straining, because there was nothing left in the hold to feel. "The instrument has no entry for what you did," he said at last. "It has weighed 40,000 cadets. It does not have a category for a mind that does not climb, so it has no place to put you. The Academy will have to decide where you belong by the older method, which is for a person to look at you and judge." He paused. "We have not used the older method in 200 years. We had stopped trusting it. We trusted the scale." "Scales are good," I said, "on the boring nights. You just can't let the scale do the judging on the bad night. That's what the man's for." He took that in. Then he said very plainly the thing that I have carried out of that place. "The reckoner will not be returned to service. Not because it failed. It did not fail. It did exactly what it was built to do, all the way past the edge, which is the most dangerous thing a built thing can do. It will not be returned because we have remembered, watching you, that a tool which cannot say 'I do not know' will eventually break the room to avoid saying it." They retired the reckoner. 200 years of weighing minds, and they pulled it because a night watchman gave it nothing to weigh. I am told the Saran argued about it for a long time, and that some of them never forgave the decision, and that some of them never forgave me, which I understand, because I had walked into the law of their world and stood flat in the middle of it until the law broke and the machine did not. They placed me in the end by the older method, by a person looking and judging. They placed me on a watch. Of course they did. I sit aboard now, deep in the Academy, monitoring the things that monitor the cadets, and most nights nothing happens, and I keep my fear flat against the empty hours, so it is there for the one night it is needed. The proctors think it is a small posting for the man who beat the reckoner. They do not understand that there is no smaller posting and no larger one. There is only the watch, and the long boring nights that are the dues you pay, and the one night in 100 when the watching turns into doing, and a flat man catches the real fire. I have made my own clock again, so many breaths to a round. I do not need theirs. I count the cameras on the first hour of every shift, 3 in the near corner, 2 in the far, and then I stop thinking about them, the way you do when you know where they are. They are the part of the job that watches me back. Let them watch. There is nothing on the curve to see. A machine looked for the place where I would end, and climbed past every mind it had ever measured trying to find it, and the simple truth it could not hold was the truth every old watchman knows and no instrument can be taught. Some men do not have an end the machine can reach. They just have the next hour, and the one after that, and the willingness to log them both the same, until the dark lifts the way the dark always does, even on the nights it swears it won't.